My name is Steve Rowe, and I'm the general manager of Rowe Motors. I'm 56 years old, and growing up, I was the victim of bullying. In Michigan, I moved there in the 5th grade. Our family, my dad purchased a Chevrolet dealership at that time, and I was started in elementary school. And in Sault Ste. Marie, hockey was a big thing. And since I had never really grown up in the community, I wasn't active in hockey because it started out early, but never really quite fit in. And so I would say for me, the things I most remember is going back in the elementary school of 6th grade. Is that's when I had a paper route at that time. It was a Detroit Free Press, a morning route, and did pretty well with it. I was growing up, and you always made some money on the paper route. And that's where I think that's what I most remember about it is people wanting money and if you didn't supply the money, then you got beat up. And that was I remember going home I'd find different ways home from school on different streets because I walked to school, and so I would just find a different route home each day, and so hopefully you could avoid the bullies that were there. And one of them, the instance I remember in the 6th grade, I was in a classroom, and the teacher was also a principal, and one of the students says, I think Steve Rowe's got lice in his hair. And the teacher came up, and he had a pencil, and he just scratched him. No, he doesn't. And I'm thinking, gosh, it was pretty humiliating. I can remember that to this day when that happened. And but really, it was on the way home from school that most of the bullying. I was fairly tall for my age, always have been, and I've never been that coordinated in any sports activities, and so I think I was probably an easy target for bullies, and just remember that at the time that just trying to find a safe way home, and so you wouldn't get picked on. And I came home beat up a few times. Nobody really stuck up for me. I was kind of one that since I didn't maybe quite fit in that well, I was on my own a lot, and so growing up, I maybe didn't have that other student to stick up for me that says, is this really right? So that's the part. And then I went into junior high, and that's really, I think, the place where I really remember it the most. But the good news for me about that time is I became active in scouting. And it was in Boy Scouts, and started in Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, Explorers, and that area was a really safe place for me. I actually went all the way and achieved my Eagle rank in scouting. And so I think for me, I learned a lot of leadership things, but also it was, my scoutmaster would never, he knew it was going on because I would talk to him about it, but it never occurred in the troop, and that was a good thing, and so that was a favorable thing. Also, another thing, because it was a family dealership, I worked at the dealership, and so that was also a good place for me, and of course the other employees, they treated me well. I washed cars, that type of thing, growing up. But at that time, it was really the school environment that I really remember the most traumatic part. Going through school, and it went all the way through high school. My parents and brothers and sisters and siblings, are all supportive of me. But it really, I can remember one time, one of my parents' friends was a English teacher at middle school. And we were out on did some things together on a weekend, and I was kind of on a weekend, on a Sunday, I explained to her, about the bullying that was going on. And so the next day I was sitting in a classroom and got paged to the principal's office. That was on a Monday. So I went down there, and basically I, kind of told my story of everything that went on. And that was probably a huge mistake, because I can't tell you it wasn't handled properly, but man, I'll tell you, the beating got worse after that. So I quickly learned that was probably not a place to go, and always knowing what to do, I think, in bullying is so difficult. What the right answer is, it's a very complicated subject, but for me that didn't work. And his intentions were very, very honorable, but I probably wished he wouldn't have named names. I think that would have made it easier for me. But one of the things in high school, my grades suffered. I graduated from Sioux High School with a 1.9 average, so it was about a D plus average, and that wasn't a B plus, that was a D plus. And bullying really I know had an effect on me in school, and mainly in the area of self-esteem, of how I felt about myself. I really didn't feel that good about myself. And so my dad had an idea that he felt I always had the capability academically to do well, that I wasn't doing as well, and they were very supportive of me and trying to do different things. And so my senior year of high school, Dad talked to the college president. I was allowed to take college accounting and English, and as a senior in high school. And I went in and ran across, and I actually ended up getting A's in both classes. And so I knew then, okay, I can do this. So I went into Northwood University in Midland, Michigan, and there, because my grades were so poor, that graduated with a D+ average, they put me on academic probation, and which was entirely correct because they didn't know I could handle the grades, and so I was only allowed to take 2 classes my first term, and I got A's in both of those. And pretty soon, instead of 8 hours, I was taking 27 hours a term, and then graduating in 3 years instead of 4, and ended up with 2 degrees instead of 1. So I really, in college, it was really the environment of the schools that, in my case, that really did it. In the year 2000, I decided, you know what, I'm going to go back and get a master's degree. And I'm 56 years old now, but I got a master's degree and got at Southern Oregon University. And I know one of the reasons in the back of my mind that I wanted to get the master's degree to say, you know what, I could do this. I still always have this challenge out there that, I was stupid because my grades were so poor, but at the same time, I knew I had the ability. So I went and got the master's degree and, did very well at SOU, graduated with honors there as well. In 2005, I had a really unique opportunity, and I went back to the Center for Creative Leadership in Colorado Springs. And it was a 1-week class, and it was supplied by Cadillac. It was part of a program that our dealership was enrolled in. There were about 25 other Cadillac dealers from around the country at this class. And it really was a week-long thing, and they did a lot of testing, personality testing, and really what your strengths were, what areas you could improve upon in your life. And at the end of it, they had a psychologist to meet with you on a one-on-one basis. And at the end of that, this gentleman, he's very diplomatic, but he says, I think you could use some, I don't know what it is, but I think some more intensive therapy would be appropriate for you. And he says, was there an event in your life that would have there's some things here? And I says, well, bullying for me was very much a problem growing up. And he said, well, it really shows. And he says, I think some therapy would help you. So I came back and was on the board of Asante and called Roy Vineyard. And Roy's the CEO of Asante, and he says, I got an idea. And he says, so he went to Dr. Phillips, and he was head of the mental health. He's a psychiatrist from RV in Rogue Valley. And he met with me for over a few months. And that was a life changer. That was at 50 years old that event took place. So he really explained the situation and where I felt things were coming from. And I think the biggest thing he made me realize is the gift of feedback. And I use that a lot of times with people that I talk to, is how feedback you give is a gift to somebody. And what he did was he had me go back and talk to people that I had grown up with. And in our case, because I was in Oregon, of course that was in Michigan, and that life was beyond me. I really don't have any connection back there, which is probably for me a good thing, because the emotions are still very, very much the surface there. But he had me go back, and I realized I'm not a bad person. That through that feedback, even growing up in that time, that I wasn't stupid. I really felt I could do more, and that was a life-changing event for me. It made things so much better. But for me, that bullying it was an impactful part of my life. And I think the good part through all this, unbelievable as it may seem, is I think it's made me a better person. Now, I would never thank the people that bullied me, but I would say that through this whole thing, and it's really a lifetime, and it still has an effect on me. but it's made me a stronger person, and I've come out of it in a better way than probably some others did. But for me, I think it's a positive thing. Wouldn't go through it again for anything, and I would not wish it on anybody. But reaching out and getting the help really made a difference for me. It is such a tough question for me to know what I would do differently. I don't know, because I felt I don't blame anybody. It was a fact of life. I think making the classrooms safe. My wife is a second grade school teacher, and we've talked about it often, and she is, we've talked about bullying, and but I know her classroom, it's not allowed. If it's a special needs child, everybody is an equal, and all of us have gifts to bring. And I think where it really needs to, it's in the home and in the classroom, of making it safe that, all of us, some of us are better, nobody is perfect in all areas, and all of us are good in certain areas and strengths, and just looking for those strengths and making people feel good about themselves. I think that's the number one thing, so you don't suffer with a poor self-esteem. One of the places that I do a lot of volunteering work, and one of the places that is the most meaningful to me is the Oregon Youth Authority. And that's these young people down there have made some bad mistakes in their life, and they're really trying to turn their life around. And that's a place that I really try and work with them to say, and I talk about the bullying story. This is really, believe it or not, the first time in this film that I've really talked about it openly. Even my parents, I think, they know parts of the story, but I don't think anybody knows the whole story. And I think over the years the story has probably gotten, certain parts of it are in the back of my mind and they're not there now. But if I saw somebody in a parking lot or something like that, I would step forward and say, okay, probably with a sense of humor, try and say, hey, what's going on here? And and then try and get to the person that was being bullied to try and say, okay, things can be different. Where do you feel? And spend some time with them. And I think we just really listen to people. I think if we spend less time talking and more time listening, I think that would have a more positive impact on trying to find out, okay, what's really going down. I think asking, in our setting, I asked the whys 5 times, and by that I'm trying to go back to the root cause. Okay, why is this happening? Okay, why did it really happen? And keep asking that why, and try and drill down farther into why do you think it's really happening. And I think asking why 5 times for me really helps define the real problem and get to the root cause of the problem without getting sometimes what you think is a surface part of the problem. It goes much deeper than that. I think a lot of times with young people, and you see this where people have been bullied, and the tragedy, of course, is when you see things that happen in schools, shootings or something like that. I mean, of course, I'd never even condone that in any stretch of the imagination, because but I think the bullying is it plays a part in all those situations of people not feeling good about themselves.
Talking about therapy, and when you talk about the asking why 5 times, is that what you did for yourself? Is that something that the doctor helped you with, and perhaps going beneath the surface, as you were saying? Or?
I asked why 5 times, for improvement areas of self-improvement, a life improvement thing of, any things I'm involved with in a business situation. But I think so many times we don't often ask ourselves so many times enough and get to the root cause of the real problem, because sometimes it's so deep, and that really did help me, is to go ask, for me, why do you really feel this way? Okay, and asking it yourself multiple times, you really get to your truth. And sometimes it takes more than 5 times, but at whatever time it takes, you just do it. I'm very much for the underdog, and none of us are perfect, and I probably make more mistakes than most people do. I'm quick to apologize when I do make a mistake, and I feel terrible when I do make mistakes. But I really don't want to say I'm better than anybody else, because I feel so much about that. But when people get hurt, you really want to say, okay, find out what their story is. And sometimes, you have no idea what people go through. And if I can make somebody's life a little bit easier, along the way, I would really do that. I would do anything. I put the other person's interest ahead of my own. I'm not going to say I do that every time, but I sure attempt to do that every time. At the time you're a young person in high school or middle school, junior high, you think your problems, and I can remember the time just thinking, my life is never going to be, I'm never going to amount to anything. It's going to be, I'm going to have a rotten life because nobody likes me. I mean, that's the part that I think that they remember. And it doesn't have to be that way. I think if, I think now it's cyberbullying, whether it's Facebook, you see things there that take place, whether it's, I think things are even more complicated today than they were then, when I grew up. But at the same time, it's, you talk about the physical part of bullying, but to me the emotional part of bullying is much more damaging than the physical part. I mean, I would go home and I'd have some cuts and bruises from being knocked to the ground, but to me, much more damaging was what went on in my mind. That was what I remember the most, is just the terrible toll that you can take on somebody by putting them down emotionally rather than physically, because the skin heals. I mean, I don't have, that's a minor part of the thing, but the emotional toll that it takes is so much more traumatic. I mean, it can last a lifetime. For me, if I wouldn't have gotten help when I did at 50 years old, I'd have it today. We wouldn't be doing this interview today because it would still be that part of me that would not be. And it's one thing I will say too, that I think it's a process. I don't think you could swallow a magic pill and have a cure for bullying. I think it's a process. I have a folder at home that I call my encouragement folder, and I go back to that folder and look at things and say where people have written me notes of encouragement, and it's places I can draw it from, a strength that I can draw from, and say, when you get those times that you're not thinking really good positive thoughts about yourself, and you say, you know what, you are a good person, you do the right things, and you've got that place, the strength to draw from. But I think you do have to, it's just a process, and I would say my life, it's not been a straight going up as far as an improvement thing. There's been bumps in the road along the way, but overall it's gone in a positive way, and up and down, that type of thing. And you have things that knock you down, and then you have things that build you up. But one thing is, the whole process takes time, and out of this time that makes you stronger, I think it just, each time that you get beaten down, or it just comes back to make you a stronger person. And the bullying, I would never wish bullying upon anybody. I mean, there is absolutely no excuse for bullying in any environment, whether it be a school, whether it be a business, whether it be a nonprofit organization. And unfortunately, it exists in many different parts of our society, but bullying is there. But what can we do as a person to make things better, and try and ask, okay, what is that person really going through, and look to try and say, rather than just yourself, it's going to be okay. To me, the hardest part of therapy is going to somebody else and saying, I need help. That was really difficult for me. And I think, for me, that one word would be embarrassment. Because you never want to say that you went and sought mental health treatment. But for me, that was it was the best thing for it. And the avenues out there are so many places to get help. Sometimes you just need different levels of help. Mental health can be as much as talking to your parents. Mental health could be talking to a person that you really deeply respect. Or, if it's really more serious, you might need to go to another level of help. And for me, that's what I needed. I needed to go to that extra level of help, and that's what the Center for Creative Leadership told me. And the part that I to this day remember is, we were in a conference room, and it was a big U-shaped table, and there was 25 Cadillac dealers in this room. And in this room, um, everybody's strong, you know. And I started telling my story of that when I got back to Grants Pass, I was going to get help. And I can remember there was a box of Kleenex along the back wall, and never paid any attention to them. And it wasn't long. There was, everybody wanted to help. I didn't know these people. And I'd only known them for the week that I was there. And the power of that room, everybody pulling for me, saying, it's going to be okay. You could do this. You can do this. And then making that phone call to say, you know what, I need help. It was so, it was scary, and it was a stretch like you'd never gone on before. But at the same time, it was a life-saving experience for me. I really honestly feel that.
The new you, perhaps?
New Steve. Yeah. And I mean, I really felt like my progress had been, it's not to say that in that time that I graduated from high school until I was, let's say, 50 years old, that I hadn't made any progress. I had made marvelous progress. And I think it's kind of like, the bowling it's kind of like a piece of wood. And if you were to pound a nail in it, and then you took that nail out, there's nothing you could ever do to take that nail hole would always be there. And if I were to put a coat of paint over that nail hole, you wouldn't know that nail hole is there, but I would. I would know that nail hole was, and there was nothing I could ever do to take that away. But that whole process makes you stronger. These people, these Cadillac dealers, were all very successful. I mean, they were all over the United States, and the compassion they showed me, and I'd never met any of them, and probably I've seen a couple of them at Cadillac meetings since then, and they've asked how things are going, and I've explained that, and I can remember at the time, and I talked to them later afterwards, and they were asking me how the progress was going, and for me, there was more. I had farther to go than anybody in that room in terms of my mental health. But yet for me, the results were probably greater than any other person in that room. So that was the good news part of the story, even though it was it was gut-wrenching in that room. It was, and I mean, the emotions, I was literally on the floor breaking down crying. It was so, I can picture myself at that time saying, okay, and if that other person hadn't expressed, says, you need to get, I think you need some more intensive therapy. If he wouldn't have said that, I would have not opened up to the situation. But he gave me the okay to say, okay, this is something. And then it was a case of what I was going to do about it.
People can surprise you for the better, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are so many positive stories, and even on Facebook today, and I still have some high school friends on my Facebook page, and they'll see things that, well, for example, this past year, I shaved my head for Relay for Life. Our dealership raised $11,000, and these people, and I don't think they even realize to this day where I was at that situation in high school. They said, that is such a neat thing that you're doing for the community. And in the high school yearbook, I saw I was a person that was giving them, but at the time I wouldn't have, and I really, obviously I hold some feeling that are probably not the most positive feelings towards some of them, of the bullies that went on, and I really couldn't tell you where they are today. And I really don't care. I still picture them, their faces, their names. I can still picture the bullies that happened. But that's behind me. I wouldn't have any interest in meeting with them. I've never been back, and one of these days I will. I've never been back to a high school reunion. And I really, that's would say to me, the next opportunity that I get, I plan to go back to it. Not as a negative, but as a positive of saying, and not to talk about, I don't want to talk about where I was or whatever, but I want to talk about who I am today. It's not important who I was then, but what is important is who I am today. That's where I really want to make the difference. I don't want to look backwards. I want to look forward. That's really the reason that I'm doing this. I've never shared this really with anybody. This story with anybody. In pieces of it, yes. Obviously, my family knows. My wife knows. But I've never gone public with it before. And my goal with going out in the limb like this, because it's a stretch for me, is to say, I think preventing bullying, that's where everything that we can do to stop bullying, really we should do. And what I can do, and that's the reason, like I said, I work with the Oregon Youth Authority, because that's the most troubled area. And I'll be there tomorrow with them. And I do it twice a year. And I do it for 5 weeks at a time. And I really talk about bullying at the time. And I feel like there's nobody more powerful to tell a bullying story than me, because I've lived through bullying, and at the same time, I've come out of it on the other side.
It's hard, we talk about everything seems so big, and just getting up and going to the school. I mean, some kids don't go to school, because they're scared of the bully.
I would say, for me, I can remember at the time, in high school at the time, thinking suicide. It was that powerful for me, of saying, you know what, if this is how I'm going to live the rest of my life, is this how I want to really live? I would say, and I would never want to say, there were every acts of carrying on, and I don't know where I would be on that relationship, but I can remember very much the time saying, you know what, I don't think I want to go through the rest of my life living like this. And the not fitting in, I think, is really a hard thing, but yet it's so important to make all of us feel like, and I think that's another part that made me a stronger person, and a better person actually, is looking out for people to say, you know what can we do to make that person fit in, to be more comfortable with one? Because some of us are different. All of us, I like to say that's why we have, different items on a menu at a restaurant, because not all of us have the same choices of what we're going to like at a restaurant. And that's okay. That's what makes us good. And a person that is a vegetarian could still sit down and eat with a person that likes meat, and we can still get along. And we just need to appreciate each other's differences. And with bullying, I don't think we allow for each other's differences. That's what and sometimes people are really different in terms of whether it be skin color, whether it be hair color, whether it be a person that is active. For me, I was never that good in sports, but that doesn't mean that everybody has different gifts to bring. And my challenge is to try and bring out the gift in that person and what makes them a better person. That's what I mean. If you said to me, okay, Steve, what's your ultimate goal of telling your story? I want to say hope. To take a person that doesn't have hope, because if you didn't have hope, you really don't have much going for you. And I think if a person, that would be my main goal of speaking out like this, is, while preventing bullying is important, giving people hope to know that things can be different than what they are. And it doesn't matter what age you are, and it could be young, old, but hope is such an important thing to have. And bullying can never take away hope from me. They might have, and I wonder to this day, maybe they did at the time, but obviously I'm here to tell my story today. So I know I still have hope.